Welcome to the first, and hopefully of many, Death and Decomp podcasts. My name's Leon Higley.
My name's Amanda Rowe.
And we're both professors. We're both forensic entomologists. And Amanda was back years ago, was my PhD student. And together we have a consulting company. That's probably gracing it with more. A little bit more.
We can just introduce ourselves.
A little bit more than it should be. But anyway, we have a consulting business, Death and Decomp Sciences, which we do training for the police. And we also do casework principally, but whatever forensic entomology is, but lots of homicides. So, Amanda, you want to introduce yourself and let people know who you are?
I am Dr. Amanda Rowe. I am a biologist, a forensic scientist, a decompositional ecologist. I go by lots of titles and wear lots of hats. We are joining you from Nebraska. We are partners in business. We are partners not in crime.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And we thought this podcast would be an excellent way to have conversations with some of our favorite people, as well as share knowledge and bring up issues and just have conversations about the state of science and education and forensic science in the country right now.
Part of what we wanted to do was use this not just to explore rotting flesh and decomposing bodies, as much fun as that is, but also to just talk about some science things in general and what have you. And as things develop, I suppose we'll be responding to whatever queries people have for us. And we'll do some interviews with guests and what have you. So I don't know, we're looking forward to having a lot of fun with the podcast, and hopefully you will too. Today we're broadcasting from the library of the Higley Entomological Museum, which is a glorified family room in my house. The Higley Entomological Museum itself is just to my right. It was originally a yeah, Amanda's going to show you. That's it below the clocks. It's a I guess you call it a secretary. Although there's some entomological stuff there, basically the entomology has permeated the entire house, but that was the original housing of, it's like I like to call it the HEM, Higley Entomological Museum. And Amanda made certain we had a roaring fire to create the right sort of British cozy atmosphere here with
that's right.
The TV go, the TV. Can you spin the other way?
Our TV fire.
Our TV fire's going. And we have beverages of choice. Look, mine's in my Keep Calm and Carrying. You'll be able to find that on our merch page as soon as we have one.
I'm drinking tea out of a bone cup.
So we're very serious about this.
So grab your favorite beverage, find a comfortable place to sit, and buckle in. This is the first Death and Decomp podcast.
So Amanda, I used the maggots you gave me, those superworms.
Superworms?
Well, that's what it says on the box.
Well, I was just reusing.
Oh, that's not where they came from?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for gosh sakes, I'll have to get the right information. And do you know what species they are? Are they Vicina?
Either Vicina or Vontoria. I don't know. They haven't.
All right.
They're just pupating, so when they emerge, I'll get them. I didn't look at the maggots to see.
I'm just gonna get the scope out today. So so what we were doing, so you know, is I'm interested in the biology of maggots when they're a big writhing mass. And what's going on in there. Those masses of maggots really, really heat up. And in fact, that's a question I have for you. Do you know what the hottest warmest temperature is you've seen in a mass?
In Fahrenheit, no, but probably.
Well, in centigrade.
41? 42?
I think I've seen hotter than that. Well, interesting if it is 42.
For our non-entomology listeners, maggots are just immature or baby flies. So we're just talking about baby flies of different kinds.
Let me see if I can remember. I'm just looking up what this is from Fahrenheit to centigrade.
We can always cut this part.
No, yeah, we can cut our ignorance out. Yeah, so I've seen them at 45.
Okay.
That was it was 112 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So what do you think we measured the lethal temperature at? And Excuse me, let me back. Excuse me, that I should edit out. My cold. So we did an experiment with a current PhD student, who's the world's most unique PhD student, Dr. John Abafamwa, who holds a medical degree, is an experienced forensic pathologist, has a law degree, and because he wanted to be as overqualified as humanly possible, he's pursuing a PhD in forensic entomology. So John and I did what are called lethal temperature studies, where we put individual maggots in vials. They're in a water bath that we heat at a 1 degree centigrade per minute rate, and then we see when they die. Or really what we do is we find what's called the critical temperature. It's where they stop moving and aren't able to recover. So between 47 and 48, I would say like 47.6.
It's pretty hot.
Really hot.
Especially for blues.
Now here's an interesting thing. So I assumed that if they were preconditioned, that is to say, if they were held at a warm temperature for a while, that would induce heat shock proteins and they'd be able to better tolerate things. And for those of you who are not scientists, when you get a fever or when you're out in the sun, you produce heat shock proteins. It's common across animals, and they're an incredibly important type of protein protector or enzyme protector that do a lot more than just deal with heat shock. Anyway, so we held some for 15 minutes at 40, and I naively thought maybe we could get them to go up. They do not like 15 minutes at 40 degrees, so they died around 1.5 degrees earlier.
Well, that supports the idea that they're moving around in that mass.
Yeah, I think it
cool off a little.
I think it shows a flaw in the standard way we measure lethal temperature tolerance, because you just ramp that minute by minute. So I think we'll do some studies where we increase the time. I don't know if we'll increase the ramping temperature, but we'll maybe stair step it. Take them to a temperature, hold them for 10 minutes. Take them to the next couple degrees, hold them for a few minutes, because I don't think they're able to tolerate over time the temperatures they can tolerate instantaneously.
I know we're talking about the difference between inverts and invertebrates, but I assume people, because this is like the slowly boiling a frog to death thing, right? So
Yeah.
Has there been any work on frogs, for example, looking at stepping up temperature that way or holding at a certain temperature and see if it takes another?
Surely there has to be. When I looked at the review articles on lethal temperature things, I mostly found, I was focused on inverts.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big debate about methodology. And so that's where I just went with whatever the standard was as proposed there. So
you think, again,
but the stair step
the heat shock protein process would be similar, I would think, from a biochemistry level. So it might not hurt to check out what they've been doing in vertebrates.
Yeah, we definitely will. So I need to do that, but I'd like to get minimally. I'd like to look at the subfamilies of blowflies, because I think that'll give us a pretty good idea about how tolerant they are. But I would say, over 45, that's really temperature tolerant.
Yeah.
I had predicted they would go at 45, so my prediction was off by a couple of degrees.
And the group that he was using is a group of blowflies that generally are found in cooler times of the year in cooler places on the planet. So we find them in our area in spring and fall, but we don't tend to see them in the summer because it's too hot. And they'll even pop up sometimes in the winter in windows and things, because they can overwinter as adults in attics and under siding. And I remember a paper out of Europe with california species from this subfamily going to like 4 degrees Celsius. They were found in a cave at 4 degrees Celsius, laying eggs on the body of a climber that had fallen into
at 4 degrees
Celsius. Yeah.
They must lay those eggs, and the eggs must just sit there and do nothing for.
Yeah, I don't remember if there were
Do you know what species?
actively growing maggots. It was, I think it was Vicina.
Okay,
It might have been Bontoria. I actually don't remember. I'd have to look it up, but it was a califera.
cool.
Yeah. So
So thank you for getting the maggots for us. And I'm going to have to start shaking the trees and get more maggots. But it's such a cool experiment to do. Before I leave this topic, do you know how we determined they were dead?
shock them.
Sort of. So they don't like getting heated, so they'll be moving around. And so they become, they'll drop down to the bottom of the vial and just sit there, no movement. And I can tap the vial, no movement. And we brought them out. But we got fooled in the first round. So in that round, they became this quiescent state at 46. And so I left them out and held them just out in the open for half an hour. And sure enough, they recovered. But over 46 and a half. So well, what did I say? We had them die at 47.4, and all. I think the highest one survived to 48.2. So it's in that 47 and a half to 48 range, but no recovery.
I've noticed that when maggots die in colony, oftentimes when they die, they sort of elongate out. I assume that's muscles.
Yeah, interesting. These curled.
Really?
Yeah, they were a little more C-shaped. And yeah, so as our protocol, we left them for half an hour, which I think is long enough to see if there was any recovery.
Are you guys going to investigate the protein levels and things, or are you going to look at the biochemistry aspect of it?
Oh God, I'd like to, but that's a
whole other thing.
It's a whole other thing, which I have no equipment or money for. But
welcome to science.
Yeah, that's actually what should happen. You bring up a good point. I wonder if I've got them in 95% alcohol. I wonder if that would work, or if I need to put some in liquid nitrogen and see. The cool thing would be to test test them at different temperatures and see what genes are upregulating. And it's going to be heat shock genes and things like that. And I know that those genes are identified in Drosophila, so there'd be identified genes you could compare to. So
I know from my syrphid friend that syrphid DNA is preserved in 95%. So
yeah, I have to think about that. The problem with holding them at -80 is, I have to get the liquid nitrogen, and then I have to make sure I find a place to store them, and I don't want to store them indefinitely. Do you have somebody at College of St. Mary's who would do this as a project, looking at upregulation?
Probably.
Maybe we should talk about that off camera. That would be fun. So, yeah, this is a pretty good example of exactly how science goes. Do I know somebody? Can I afford to do it? It would be great to do, but I don't have the money or the equipment.
Do we know somebody with equipment? Let us borrow it or come to their lab.
Give them a paper for their resume. So, okay, item 2 on my, or we could trade. I have more gossip or more information. I don't know, is that really gossip?
I don't know if I have any gossip today.
So I got invited to be a subject editor for what is it called? Forensic Science. I don't know if it's another one of these predatory journals or not, but I don't care. So I'm gonna say yes to that.
You'll take that predatory journal, turn it into a real one.
That's exactly right. And they like to have themed issues. So I would like to talk to you about who we could invite to write articles. And focused, I suppose, on taphonomy and those sorts of issues. So I think that would be fun. The other thing is, did you see this scientific paper? And I didn't recognize the first name, but it was with Mark Benecke on animal damage to cadavers.
No, but if it's Mark Benecke paper, it's going to be exciting.
Well, here's the weird thing about the paper. It's got pretty great color photographs. It's online, and it's got those classic pictures of arms with ant feeding.
Okay.
And so the way this looks is, imagine an arm that has
like acid burns.
Acid burns, yeah. It looks like somebody sort of scraped away part of the skin. And so they talk about that, They talk about wasps. They went through. I couldn't find any reference to cockroach feeding.
Really?
And I thought that was a curious omission. Do they not have cockroaches in Germany and Central Europe? I think they do.
Oh, they do. Is this Mind Your Decompositional Assumptions?
That's the paper.
Forensic Science 2022?
Uh-huh. Open access, right?
Yep.
So we
Yeah.
can actually read it.
Through MDPI.
So,
I like their avatar for Forensic Science. It's just a handprint with a in a red box.
yeah, it's cool. I got a paper submitted there. I hope they'll get back to me on it soon.
Okay. Yep, ant feeding.
Yeah, you're not
I
seeing
have
it.
not, I have not experienced too much ant feeding. We did some research about 10 years ago in the sandhills of Nebraska with rabbits and fetal pigs, where we did see some ant feeding. They would remove the hair and get that out of the way, and then they would start feeding. But it wasn't a lot, so
Did it remove? I mean, did it remove dermis? Did it have it?
very small amount. So I feel like, some of these pictures that we're looking at in this article, which we can post in the comment section of our.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You have to die on an anthill, I think, for something like this, because
I think
that's a lot. That's a lot of feeding damage, and in all of the dead bodies and all of the research that we've done, I just haven't seen that much.
Well, think about the cockroach stuff. I mean, that's another good example where if you have cockroaches feeding on you, there is a very, very big cockroach population.
Yeah.
And I guess for those of you who aren't aware of this, you don't have to be dead to have cockroaches feed on you. You just have to be immobile. So there's some cases, some abuse cases with neglected children or the elderly, where one of the indicators of neglect is actually cockroach feeding, which is pretty high on the list of the worst things.
Yeah.
Worst sort of torture I can imagine, having cockroaches feed on me. So, yeah. So I thought you'd be interested in that paper.
The slugs in Germany are much larger than the slugs.
Are they? I hear dogs behind me. We may have the dogs coming through.
Should we pause and take a
Yeah, maybe we're gonna pause and take a dog break. I have one piece of news that I wanted to share before we move on, and that is I finally got approval for the University of Nebraska to accept Neil Haskell's collection.
Nice. So
So
it's going to move to the big collection, the university collection.
yeah, I don't know if you know Matt Paulson. He's the new. Can't remember if I was on his committee, but I knew Matt when he was a grad student. So he's the new curator, and he was excited about it. Really excited. So I think what will happen is I'll get a room in Hardin Hall and start processing the collection, and then as we get the cabinets filled, we'll move them down to Nebraska Hall. And I'm going to try, and I was hoping that you'll join me on it. I'm going to try to get an NIJ grant to do curation and digitization of all the files, and maybe we can combine it with the 3D stuff.
Yeah, that would be great.
And so on that, we can talk off camera, but I wanted to try to bring the first things back in early January. So I was hoping you might be able to go.
Yeah, I told him I would come see him.
So that'd be perfect if we could.
I told him sometime next year. So as long as the weather's okay.
So let's try to identify a date or dates.
Okay.
So cool.
All right. We are going to talk about our first insect of the week. So our goal with this podcast is to not just talk about science and forensic science, but also insects in general and why we think they're awesome. And so to do that, we thought that we would have an insect of the week. And this week, our very first one, we are going to start with
our business logo.
Our business logo, which is the golden fly, or the golden fly of valor. This was
I've got it on the. We're getting all the bling, all the merch ready.
That's right. We have vinyl stickers. We have sewn patches.
And we have, let's see, let me take it off. We've got very cool elite
enamel pins.
Yeah. Where is it? There we go.
For our Patreon supporters.
As soon as we get the Patreon page going.
So the golden fly was a symbol in Egypt that was used for strength on the battlefield or military prowess or just doing something that helped the Egyptian people. It was given to men and women in Egypt. And the hypotheses about why they chose a fly has to do with flies' persistence. So anyone who has been outside trying to eat during the summertime will know what we're talking about with fly persistence.
It's specifically in the desert. The biting flies are so horrible and absolutely relentless. And in support of this, as the idea was, the soldiers would keep attacking no matter what the enemy did. And it was a commonplace thing was the first person over the wall would receive. So it's probably the first sort of military decoration that we know of. I should mention this business about biting flies. If you read T.E. Lawrence of Arabia's book, Revolt in the Desert, he talks about how horrible the biting flies are. So for millennia, literally, people have been complaining about the flies. In Nebraska, it's an insect called stable flies, not necessarily a forensic species, although Stomoxys calcitrans, I think. I don't know what the species is of biting fly in the Middle East. It seems like I should know that. I think
biting sandflies. Those are tiny.
But I think it's a big, robust. I think they're robust flies. It could be the same one because I think stable fly is. I better not say. I started to say it was introduced, or I think it's cosmopolitan in distribution, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So
there's also the association of flies and death. So you would have a lot of flies on battlefields, which is where the soldiers were. But you didn't have to be a soldier to get that.
No, so we came across this great article that we'll post. So do you want to give the gist of this, and I can do my dad jokes? So
there was a
pharaoh.
Yep,
she was not that usual.
So Pharaoh Ahatep, and she married her brother, I think.
They always did.
Yeah. Married her brother, had 2 sons, and one of them was killed. And
in battle.
And the younger one was too young to take over, so she became sort of the
regent is what you would call. So they were Thutmose. Is that right? That's the one who died.
That was the one who died. Yeah.
And Ahmose, which, as I like to say, and then there was the third brother, Almost, who wanted to be a pharaoh, but it just didn't happen for him because of his name. So
it was during her regency that she actually earned her first Fly of Valor, Golden Fly of Valor, by helping bring a bunch of groups together and sort of uniting Egypt under
she helped. I think she helped maintain the union of Upper and Lower Egypt. We know about this from inscriptions on stele pillars, STELE, and they feature in jewelry. So our stylized tiger bill here is not. I mean, it's stylized, but it's very much in keeping with the way the golden flies actually are represented. And interestingly, through the centuries, so this was, I think, around 1550 BC. That's when she was alive. So it dates at least that long. But within, I don't know, 300 or 400 years, flies became more less associated with heroism, more associated with luck, good luck. And so there's these little fly amulets. I actually have one that may or may not be original, made out of lapis. Ooh. It's very stylized. It's just like a triangle with a couple lines. But those little fly amulets became more common, in much the same way that scarab beetle amulets became
also a strong Egyptian.
Yeah, and a very, very strong symbol in Egypt. It's
you guys with the movement of the sun.
That's right. The dung rolling, the sacred scarab dung rolling beetle that represented the movement of the sun by Ra across the sky. That's a Bleach was. That's a pretty common story. I don't know how common. Is it common? Do you guys know this? I'm not sure. But
Coincidentally, that's my newest insect tattoo. The Egyptian spirit.
well, I'm so sorry to hear that. Despoiling your otherwise lovely fair skin with more ink. However,
Right.
so yet again, we learned that there is
Last
a
forever.
difference between the generations. So,
Yep. Yeah.
wow.
No dung rolling, but
So you got it without a ball of dung?
yes.
That's so
Indeed, I
sad.
did. However, I did get it with Egyptian flowers.
Oh,
So I
that's
stuck
good.
with the Egyptian theme. Yeah.
My connection with this is I have, you know about the shell game, 3 shells and a pea
Yes.
that you do?
Mhm.
I have little scarab beetles, and instead of peas, they're little round brown balls, like dung balls. Yeah, I'll have to practice up and do that trick for you sometime. But I thought it was totally cool. That I was thrilled when I found, walnut-sized little scarab beetles. But then when I saw they made little dung balls as the
Yeah.
peas, that was inspired. Had to have it.
I would like to point out that the truly major difference between our logo and the true golden flies of valor is that theirs were in fact
Made out of gold. Good. You make a good point.
were in fact solid gold. So
I
you
have-
have to imagine that a lot of them they wore as necklaces, and they would have between 3 and
Yeah, 3's
5 flies on a necklace. You'd have to imagine that they would start to get very heavy.
I have a reproduction of one that's gold plated that I gave Phyllis, and then she subsequently never wears. But in fairness, did I buy it for her or did I buy it for myself?
You bought it for yourself.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's not. I get it. I get it.
Mhm.
So why did we pick it as our logo?
We like the simplicity.
Okay, aesthetics.
Yep, aesthetics. It came across well. It was simple enough that we could do a lot with it. And, we are flag people through and through. So that's why
I
I
like
chose
that.
it.
See, I have a much higher level. I like the idea of persistence and persistently trying to get at the truth. So I thought it was a good symbol
Oh.
for somebody who's
Different. Yeah.
but
we
that
came across
fits
it from
because
different.
your skills in interior design show through. Whereas,
I just have really good spatial awareness.
well, whatever. So that's the bug of the week. Next time we'll probably talk about an actual, not a
Yeah.
generic group, but
Yeah.
we'll talk about an actual
We'll talk about
species.
an actual insect.
And by all means, comment if you've got particular interests in insect groups. But God help you if you mention this or that butterfly, because come on.
We can talk about them sometime.
Honeybees and butterflies. Well, actually, now honeybees, at least there's a decomp connection.
Yep. Yeah, we
Right?
can talk about them being non-native.
Yeah, they're introduced. But there was a notion of honeybees coming out of corpses. You know this?
I do, yeah.
Is it from Aristotle?
Yeah, I think so.
What is the story that there was honeycomb inside a dead lion or something completely
Yeah.
about as unlikely as any. I think Aristotle comes across as a little too gullible when you read a lot
There's
of
a lot of stories
that.
don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I kind of see the Greek youth saying, "What can we pull on Aristotle? Let's tell him we saw this and see if he buys it." I just have this notion. It's also like my opinion of Socrates. Poor Socrates teaches the youth and is eventually forced to take hemlock, and it's a horrible thing. And yet at the same time, his students are thinking, "Why did he keep asking us those questions and never answering?" This is what that leads to. So I call that the worst teaching evaluation of all time, making the instructor take hemlock.
I think all evaluations are terrible.
and also they feel a lot like dying, so it fits on both sides, doesn't it?
The hemlock thing is interesting. So hemlock is a native plant around here, I think.
Really?
I mean, there's a lot of it around here. I actually don't know if it's native or not, but
What is it like? I don't know what hemlock is like. So woody plant,
when
right?
it first in the early spring, it looks like flattened carrot tops. It grows sort of really close to the ground and sort of spreads out. And then it very quickly, as the weather warms up, turns into this stalk that has white flowers that separate like Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah.
And the stalks themselves get pretty large. They're streaked with purple, but they're commonly
mistaken for like wild carrot and some other things. Plus, every part of the plant is poisonous and it moves cutaneously. Like you can absorb cutaneously.
Do you know what the poison is?
I don't.
Well,
But-
we'll have to post on that. I'm going to guess it's an alkaloid.
Probably.
But we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see what it
Yeah.
is.
And there's just, the reason I bring it up is because there has been, I've seen a lot of cases in the news in the last like 2 years about people accidentally poisoning themselves. The stalks are hollow, and so a lot of kids will use them as like whistles. They'll like
Oh,
cut
for
them down
heaven's
into
sakes.
and when you burn it, so a lot of farmers and ranchers will burn it, and the fumes can also make you sick and or kill you. So there's just been a lot, and you get like dermatitis, like really awful contact dermatitis. And so I just think it's interesting that it's been around since the time of Socrates, right? So
So is it introduced?
I don't know.
Or there might be
I mean, I
different
think it's
species.
okay. Maybe it's not native, but I should say it's naturalized. If
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
if it's introduced, and if it was introduced, I think it was like ages ago.
Sure.
But what I think is interesting is that it's been around since the time of Socrates, and yet people are still like accidentally poisoning themselves.
Well, there's been no decrease in human stupidity
That's true.
over the centuries. And in fact, I think we could argue that there's some evidence to suggest it's gotten worse.
I think it also goes back to maybe people just not being as familiar with their environment. You know?
The thing
Like that gap between like where you live and what surrounds you.
The thing I think is peculiar is that surely modern people understand the concepts of toxins at some level. They may not know dose makes the poison, they may forget things, but the notion that there are toxic plants, surely everybody knows that. And it's also like this issue of people dying from eating the wrong mushroom.
Yeah.
They're notorious for being toxic.
Right.
Why would you ever take a chance with a mushroom?
I don't know. I've always wondered that. Like, I don't even go morel hunting because I'm worried about getting wrong.
I think it's very peculiar, and it just reinforces my whole observation on stupidity. I mean, it's one thing you can say, well, they're ignorant, they didn't know, which species it is, and that's what killed them. But I would say no, they're stupid, because the concept there are toxic mushrooms out there exists. So as long as you realize that, or you've been told, and I'm sure everybody's been told that, to go ahead and not make certain what you're eating strikes me as, well, stupid.
Okay, another tangent. Did you see the article about forest mushroom hunters in Ukraine and how they are dying by mines because
Oh my God. Done deliberately by the Russians,
Yep.
mining the forest.
mining the forest? And so I guess I didn't know this until I read the article, but there's a very strong culture of mushroom hunting in Ukraine. And it was something that was done seasonally, like it was a excitable time of year. It was, you got ready to go out and hunt for these mushrooms. And because the war has been going on almost a year, they, a lot of Ukrainians, they've been stuck in their houses, they've been stuck in underground, and a lot of them are taking the chance to go out into the forest and find these mushrooms. One, because they need the food, and two, because they can sell them and make money. And there's quite a few people who have died from.
Well, there's two things I have to say about this. The first is, how can you claim to be a modern country and behave the way Russia's behaving? And it's easy to blame Putin, but I'm looking past Putin to the way his military is conducting this war. And second, and the second thing is that this is another reason mines need to be banned. And
I'm shocked that they are not banned.
they should be the same category as chemical biological warfare agents.
They said it will take decades to demine, and it will take millions and millions of dollars.
And undoubtedly, there will be unnecessary deaths and disfigurements.
Most likely children.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was interesting that they, in parts of Ukraine, have this culture of mushroom hunting. I thought that was really cool. And they had, in the article, this family had jars of ones that they had dried.
I think it's very much a European thing, because over 20 years ago now, when Phyllis and I were in Paris, we went to the Natural History Museum, and on the park outside, there's a big pavilion, and we went, and it was a mushroom exhibit, and it was packed. There were people, going from, and it was just sort of exhibiting different edible mushrooms, and I think there were some poisonous mushrooms there, but I was shocked at the level of interest in mushrooms and mushroom hunting. And in fact, as a matter of fact, right over my shoulder here, the Higley Entomological Museum has a collection of trade cards from the 1890s featuring mushrooms, French trade cards.
Interesting.
I think there's the collection is, I think there's 30 or 35 different mushrooms
There's just
illustrated.
too many funguses that look too similar to me. I'd be afraid of poisoning myself right off, so I'll just keep buying them from the grocery.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting aside.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I think we're done for today, aren't we?
Are we? You want to do case of the week?
Oh, do you want to talk cases? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So our first case that we chose to talk about today is actually a case that Leon worked that had some adipocere formation.
Oh.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah,
Which is
adipocere.
our vocab for villains word of the week. Adipocere is a greasy lipid formation that forms on the outside of bodies in cool, moist conditions, most generally. Can take weeks, months, years to form, depending on where that body is found. But the interesting thing about adipocere is that it does help preserve the body in some cases. It forms this like waxy, fatty covering on the outside that prevents water from getting in. We see it a lot in water bodies.
Right.
Bodies
Yeah.
that are
Very,
found in
very
water.
typical. It's if you want to think of it, it's a decay product of fat.
Yes.
It's what happens with fat, and it terms. I don't know when you think of human fat. Seeing as I had a biopsy once and could see our fat is chicken fat. It's not. It's yellow globular fat.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Like
So-
bovine fat. But anyway, yeah.
Introduce the case.
So we had a case that I was called in on, northeast Nebraska, and the victim had been missing, was known to police, was 19 years old. And when I got to the scene, the body had been recovered from the scene. So basically we were there to search the scene, and then we went and recovered evidence from the body. And there were insects on the body, and there were also pupal cases. So if you don't know, insects, as you think about insect life stages: eggs, larvae, pupae, adult. And so maggots, when they're done growing, go into this pupal stage.
Like the cocoon stage for butterflies.
And at the scene, what was interesting is the location where they found the body. We could go from a road and follow it, and there were bits of adipocere with pupae going right along. So we followed this trail, and so it became very clear this is what's called a secondary crime scene. That's not the place where the body had originally decomposed, and the fact that insects fell off while we were dragging the body
And chunks of adipocere.
and in chunks of adipocere. So we had these specimens, and everything we had adipocere on it. And one thing that we haven't mentioned about adipocere is how it smells. And if a decomposing body is bad, adipocere is worse.
Yes. If you've ever had fat decompose, if you've had just like a really fatty hamburger or other type of meat that has a lot of fat in it, it does have a unique smell.
And yeah, and
And adipocere is like 1,000 times worse.
And if you'd like to eat it, and it comes from this case. So I worked on this case, and actually Tierney helped me with this.
Okay.
One of my other students helped me with this case, and she and I ended up using vortex machines. It's a thing in the lab you use for mixing. It's got a little pedestal, and you put a test tube or a little vial on it, and it starts shaking it incredibly fast. And what happens is you get a spinning inside the vial. So it's a way for mixing. So we took acetone and put it in there, and then would vortex with the idea of trying to get the adipocere off the pupal case, which is quite fragile. and not destroying the case. And we had to do that to actually get a look at features on there so we could identify the species, which we were able to do. But so that there was a bit of a technical problem doing that before we were able to do the IDs. But the adipocere smell is just horrific. And I mentioned there was this, and so all the time I'm working with this, we worked in a colleague's lab, Carl Reinhardt. Carl deals with coprolites, all kinds of
Really old poop.
yeah, really old poop. And so he has this, I call it a cone of silence. He has this giant vacuum thing with a funnel you can put over stuff and try to control the odors, which was incredibly helpful. And so but I've been exposed to this adipocere so much. I had the smell of adipocere, right? So sometime a few days after I'd been working on the case, I decided to have some cheese and crackers. And we had, oh, you can anticipate where this is going, can't you? We had this expensive aged Gruyere cheese.
Yep.
I took one bite of that aged Gruyere and I thought I was going to vomit. I could immediately detect the same chemical notes that I could detect in adipocere. So if you get a really high quality Gruyere, there are certain elements in it that are definitely
Reminiscent
of, they're more than reminiscent, they're the same chemicals in that. So, which is not, there's nothing wrong with eating, a good Gruyere. I can eat it now, but it took me at least a couple of years before I could bring myself to eat it again. The case, so I was able to do a time of death estimate from the insects, but the case is completely tragic and really unnecessary. And it bothered me. This is one of those cases that actually bothered me, Amanda, because the victim was exactly the same age as Addison, my eldest son. And I remember, I was doing, we must have had part of the skeletal remains here, because I recall being in the lab with the skull and recovering pupae from inside the cranium and of an evening, the way one does. And I was thinking I was holding the skull and I was thinking, this poor woman is the same age as my son. Nobody deserved to be murdered. And in fact, it was a homicide. Her boyfriend was a drug dealer. She'd gone to the cops to turn state's evidence, and they didn't put her under protection. And it was county sheriff. I heard this from the county attorney. And so she went missing and was almost certainly killed and held someplace and murdered by the boyfriend. And then eventually the body was dumped. And to the best of my knowledge, that case is unsolved. They essentially know who the killer most likely was. And I think it may have been related to cartels, because if I recall correctly, I think the boyfriend was Mexican and left the country shortly after this to avoid prosecution.
I don't want to overgeneralize, but from experience, most of the cases that I've worked, and I think that Leon has worked as well, have to do with either spouses, ex-spouses, and or drugs.
I did a count. I should do it again, but a couple of years ago when I did the count, it was 90% of my cases were drug related.
Yeah.
It wasn't always directly as a drug deal, but would often be murdered because they were getting money for drugs.
Yeah.
And
they were owed money, or they had taken drugs and not paid the money, or someone thought that they had the drugs and they didn't.
And really, and even the cases,
it's crazy.
Even the cases that didn't directly involve drugs, very frequently the suspect was a habitual drug user.
Yes.
Not necessarily an addict, but
yeah.
So you'll hear us say this. This is you can do another bell. This is another one of our categories. Tips for murderers. Don't do it. Turns out that memos for murderers. Turns out that murder is not really a good solution to any problem.
Yep.
And it's probably no surprise that people with diminished restraint, is that the way to put it?
Yeah.
That can occur sometimes with drugs might resort to violence. It's a very hard, I'd say that's one of the most difficult things I've noticed working cases is the realization that there are people for whom violence seems to be a normal way to interact,
Yeah,
normal part of life.
I
And
think that's true.
it's so radically different from the way my life is or people around me that it's difficult to see. But yeah, so I would say that was a tough case because it brought home sort of how lucky I was that my kids weren't as vulnerable. And I to this day feel very badly, as you would, for that victim who did the right thing, but the system let her down.
Yeah. We'll talk a lot about systems and processes on this podcast and how they oftentimes are very different than what people think they are or assume they can be based on knowledge, interactions with the systems, and or what they see on TV.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. One of the things we'll do on an upcoming podcast is just talk about the biggest errors we see in movies, in television shows, and some of them are laughable, some of them are not so laughable. But that'll be a fun conversation for us to have.
Yeah, I get asked that all the time. That's one of the most common questions that I get asked when people find out what they do.
Oh, is that right?
They're like, "Oh, so do you watch this show?
Oh,
Or
that's happened to
Is
me.
what you do like
Yeah.
on this show?"
Yeah.
That's a very common question.
I don't have any problem with the fact that time has to be compressed on TV shows just because of the narrative, the narrative thing. So that doesn't bother me. So I'll hear people complain, "Oh, we never get our DNA results back that quickly." It's more fundamental structural things that I find bothersome.
Yeah.
And it's how do I want to put this? It's much more, real life is much more No Country for Old Men than it is Perry Mason.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
That's kind of a sad statement, isn't it? But
Yeah, it's true though.
yeah, at least in our experience, it is.
Yeah.
But we're trying.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great conversation for another time.
Yep, exactly right. So
Our cups are empty.
our cups are empty. That
The fire's
means
getting low.
it's time for you to hit like and subscribe for the algorithm. We'll be posting a Patreon page, and so that Amanda and I can enjoy wild tropical vacations with our spouses, and the luxury cars and all of these perks that apparently accrue to influencers. Because what other goal could we possibly have?
Yeah.
So
I want that life.
okay, and you guys can help make it happen. We'll see you next time.
Join us next week for another Death and Decomp adventure.